For more on this story, we're joined by attorney Stephen Monod. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
And Nicola Clark, your upcoming book, Airbus, The First 50 Years. Stephen Monod, I'll start with you. The Chinese, the Indonesians, the Ethiopians grounding all Boeing 737 MAX 8s. It's the second time in 5 months that one of those planes has crashed just shortly after takeoff. And we had this report last month in the New York Times about how Boeing had pushed the U.S. regulator, the FAA, to not train pilots.
Well, I understand. I got the same news. I understand they didn't provide the necessary information for the pilots to be able to handle the new technology that is in this new 737. And it's amazing, especially that if we go back to the Lion Airline crash, it was obviously the two sensors that gave a wrong information with regard to the angle of the plane, and the software that was linked to the sensors gave a wrong instruction, and the pilots were not able to handle it. So it seems amazing that Boeing has effectively not provided the proper information and training to this new technology.
Yeah, the New York Times report quite damning, saying that judgment by Boeing and its regulator was at least in part a result of the company's drive to minimize the costs of pilot retraining. It appears to have left the Lion Air crew without a full understanding of how to address a malfunction that seemed to have contributed to the crash. Of course, the report on the Lion Air crash back in October is not yet completely final. Are we going a little too fast?
We might be. Well, we're certainly going too fast for the Ethiopian air crash if we are making a link between the causes that are alleged for the Lion Air crash and the causes of this crash. But the facts remain what they are, and it seems at least likely that the two sensors and the link to the software could be one of the causes of the accident, especially for the Lion Air crash, even though it is not totally sure at this stage, but I mean the presumptions are very high.
The stakes, of course, are huge. We've seen Boeing's stock tumble. Boeing employs 150,000 people. It's a huge company. And the stakes are high because it's in this dogfight with its big rival Airbus.
Yeah, that's correct. Both companies split the market about 50-50 for large passenger aircraft.
They split the market, and we don't want to be too hasty in our conclusions when it comes to this latest accident. But preparing for the show, Nicola, we were looking at the numbers, and the aviation industry, it seems to all be going so fast. Air traffic, in terms of passengers, has gone up 6% in 1 year, from 2017 to 2018.
Well, it's recovering from the economic slowdown, so you will see those fluctuations. In general, on average, the volume of air traffic doubles about every 15 years. This is certainly it's an industry that's in rapid growth and is likely to continue to be so in the future.
Doubles every 15 years. We see the arguments over, this push to go fast. I mean, we're wondering whether or not it's the case in terms of this Ethiopian Airlines crash. If maybe it was a factor, maybe they should have spent more time training the pilots and all this. Do you get the sense when you look at how fast the aviation industry has grown that it is going a little too fast?
Well, I think we should make a distinction between the growth in passenger air traffic and in the amount of time that manufacturers are spending in developing new planes and upgrading them and installing new technologies on them. I think in the case of this Boeing aircraft, it was several years in development. The New York Times article that you're referring to makes the case that one of the reasons why they did not invest in sort of in a program to retrain pilots was that this was an upgrade of an existing aircraft, the 737, which is one of the workhorses of the industry. It is the biggest selling model for Boeing. It is one that pilots have generally been quite familiar with and quite comfortable with. And so this was meant to be, the software changes that were made on this plane were meant to be sort of an incremental upgrade to an aircraft. And the idea was so that the airlines could get these planes into their fleets quickly, without a whole lot of extra training for their pilots. And it seems, however, that obviously what they seemed to think was a minor adjustment that didn't require communicating to the pilots in detail may have been, a questionable decision. That's something that's going to be part of the investigation going forward.
It's going to be scrutinized.
I think we can push the argument a little further in the sense that there's a trend for the past 30 years. Technology is taking over more and more of the plane. And the issue, if what we think is the cause of the accident is effectively the cause of the accident, is the impossibility, or it makes very difficult for the crew to take back control of the plane once the software, or in that case the sensors, go mad.
Because the narrative is that air travel's never been safer. In 2018, what I'm seeing the statistic here, it's 0.19 crashes per million flights.
Yes, and in fact, if you take the crashes from a period to 28 to 2017, it's been a long decrease in accidents and in casualties. 2017, there were no casualties at all. But 2018 was had a rise in the accidents and the casualties. But you are totally right. The trend on the long term is a diminution of the crashes and the casualties. But nevertheless, the issue of the technology versus the human taking control is an issue that we will be facing for the next years.
All right, whether or not automation is perhaps too much...
Well, the automation and the sort of the human factor, the interaction between the pilots and the automation on the aircraft as you were saying, I mean, this is a theme that has been going on for decades. You can go back all the way to Airbus, to the introduction of what was called fly-by-wire technology, where for the first time you really had a significant amount of automation in the cockpit. And when that was first introduced, there were a number of accidents quite early on. In fact, one of the very first passenger-carrying flights in Hapsam in 1988, there was a fatal crash, and there was the investigations found that there was some misunderstanding by the crew and how certain elements of the flight control system worked, and there were a series of these that happened in the late 80s and early 1990s. This was something that the regulators and Airbus had to investigate and address. There were modifications that were made to the software, and I think this is part of that evolution. Unfortunately, when we're dealing with passenger aircraft, it also involves, lives being lost. So it is a challenge.
It could be into one of those new eras. I want to thank you, Nicola Clark. I want to thank Steven Monod for joining us.